So let me just run through a couple of housekeeping items to keep us on track here. So first off, because we have a large number of people, 94 people participating in today's webinar, great to have you all here. Please keep your mute on unless you want to speak. And if you do want to speak, use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and that'll allow us to recognize you and sort of keep order to our conversation. Please also make very active use of the chat for questions and comments. We will be monitoring it. And for anybody who wasn't able to make the session, but you think should know about it, just know we'll have a recording and we'll be sending out a link to that in just the next little bit. I do want to express a special welcome to Apprenticeship for America members. You know you're a member if you actually received an email from us saying that we were doing this webinar. If you heard about this webinar some other way, maybe on LinkedIn or from a friend or what have you, we want to encourage you to please feel free. In fact, we want to encourage you to join Apprenticeships for America at the URL that's given here. And we'll be posting that in the chat in just the next little bit here. And then the last little preliminary here, I wanted to let folks know that Apprenticeships for America will be having its first ever Apprenticeship Summit, March 12th through 13th in Washington, D.C. Information to go out on that in just the next little bit. If you signed up for this webinar, you're probably going to get a little notice on that, so you can expect to hear that. So first off, I thought we would just start with a little Menti poll. If you use Menti, it's a Mentimeter. It's just a way for us to sort of do a poll within a meeting. You can use the graphic here with your phone to take you directly to this poll, or you can go to menti.com and type in this code 76755208. And that'll give us a chance to get to know exactly who's on the call. So if you can log in and do that, that would be great. Here we go. Thank you for adding your information. I know we do not have 106 responses yet, so we'll let this keep going.
Sorry, I'm not doing that, guy.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This will at least give us a rough sense of who's here. A good number of apprenticeship intermediaries. Appreciate it. Appreciate your being here. And a good number of folks from the workforce development field more broadly. Actually, if you can just put in the chat if you're a something else, let us know what we missed in our poll here, and maybe we can make sure we capture your category in future polls. Thanks so much, everyone, for participating. Gives us a sense of who's here, and we can calibrate our presentation accordingly. This process, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking process, is about to formally get started. We're told that tomorrow, the Department of Labor will have the new rules posted in the Federal Register, and that kicks off a 60-day comment period. During that period, we'll be working at Apprenticeships for America to make sure you have information about the proposed new rules. And we encourage you to take advantage of some of the information that's already out there. The Department of Labor has already published a draft of the new rules. They're at the apprenticeship.gov website. And then Apprenticeships for America has also published a summary, and we've done just recently a side-by-side review of the rules that compares the CTE provisions, the proposed new apprenticeship provisions, and existing provisions. And then I also want to give a shout out to our friends and partners at the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, which has done a really nice 3-page summary of the CTE proposals in the new rules. Again, all these links will be made available to you in the chat later on in the webinar, and we'll be sending these out as a follow-up to the webinar. So lots going on. Our purpose in the next 30 days or so is to really listen to you, the practitioners in the field, get a sense of your concerns, issues, what you like about the rules, what worries you about the rules. We'll be then working that into a position statement for Apprenticeships for America, and we'll be working with the field more broadly to make sure that the Department of Labor hears from us about our perspectives on these rules. Let me just start with some very high level takes on the new rules. If you haven't had a chance to look at them just yet, they are voluminous and they are far-reaching. So you may have already heard there are 700 plus pages worth of text. You may have heard that there is not a single provision of apprenticeship as it's currently practiced in the United States that would not be touched, registered apprenticeship, I should say, that would not be touched by these rules. Perhaps one of the most interesting elements of the rules is the creation of a whole new standard for apprenticeship called CTE Apprenticeship. And on this slide, we just walked through a couple of the high-level highlights from these rules. First off, this is a new apprenticeship standard. It's for anyone who's over 16 years of age and is also enrolled in a secondary or post-secondary institution. It is really rooted in a collaboration between the apprenticeship agency or the Office of Apprenticeship and the state CTE agency. That is a necessary precondition before a CTE apprenticeship program can be established. It's to be delivered through Perkins eligible programs and folks who are familiar with and operate within the Perkins system. It requires a industry skills framework. So unlike standard apprenticeship, which is very occupationally focused, the CTE apprenticeship starts with an industry skills framework. So a key difference there. As you're going to see in just a little bit, there's shorter on-the-job hours required, but there must be included in the related instruction post-secondary education credit-worthy material. And I should also say that unlike a standard apprenticeship, which ends in a journey person or journey workers certificate, the CTE apprenticeship ends with a certificate of completion with the idea that folks participating in CTE apprenticeships would go on to either a non-CTE apprenticeship program, a regular apprenticeship program, or further education, training, or employment. So what we're going to do for the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to start with just about a 15-minute run through of the new rules. And then my partner, Ben Watsky, is going to run us through a discussion that's really intended to highlight what are the things that excite you or at least interest you about this new rules framework for CTE apprenticeship. What are concerns or questions you have about it? And then overall, where do you sort of stand, or what are some of the issues that you have with this rule? So we'll be getting to that in the sort of second half of the webinar. I do encourage you to stay on if you would, because we really appreciate your feedback and guidance on this. So first off, I want to stress, and if you read the rules, they very much stress that this relationship between the apprenticeship office and the state CTE agency is at the bedrock of the CTE apprenticeship, and so must be set forward in a written agreement. The basis of the CTE apprenticeship is something called an industry skills framework. And this is a framework that's to be developed by the Office of Apprenticeship. It's intended to really describe some of the behaviors, workplace competencies, knowledge required by the industry, not necessarily by a particular occupation. So a key difference there. Describe skills and competencies that folks should achieve under this framework. The on-the-job training is expected to be at least 900 hours, but that's significantly less than the 2,000 stipulated hours of the regular CTE, regular apprenticeship. It's intended to be aligned with the CTE goals of the state, and there may well, and in fact, I think the rules really encourage that there would be connection between the CTE apprenticeship and other industry validated skills and training methods and certifications. As I said, you get a certificate of completion, not a journey worker credential. This chart is just intended to sort of lay out some of the differences as they emerge in the new rules. You can see what's currently a rule, what are the proposed rules for regular non-CTE apprenticeship, and then what are the rules for CTE apprenticeship. The on-the-job training, as we've already said, 900 hours as opposed to the 2,000 hours. Related instruction, whereas for our standard apprenticeship, it's proposed at 144 hours for every 2,000 hours of on-the-job training. For CTE, it would be 540 hours. Importantly, the requirement is that those hours of classroom training would result in 12 post-secondary credit hours. Our friends at PIA estimate that about 360 of those 540 related instruction hours, classroom hours, would therefore need to be college course or college credit worthy. The outcome, as I said, is a CTE apprenticeship certificate of completion, with the idea that that could take you to a regular apprenticeship program or further education. Importantly, in the CTE apprenticeship framework, the supportive and career services are required and need to be described. There's a different set of rules around probation, whereas for regular apprenticeship, it's up to a year or 25% of the apprenticeship. For a CTE apprenticeship, just 30 days, sorry. The wage rates for CTE apprentices are likewise different from regular apprenticeship. Under the proposed rule, there is an expectation of a graduated schedule of increasing wages, just as in our current rules, with some special rules around a final wage that's to be 75% of a journey worker wage. That expectation is not part of the CTE apprenticeship, but there is nevertheless a requirement for progressively increasing wages over the course of the apprenticeship. And of course, the starting wage cannot be less than the minimum wage. There's expectation for higher levels of monitoring and oversight that's stipulated in the rules by the sponsor of the CTE apprenticeship. And intermediaries are given additional or special responsibilities, including coordinating with relevant education agencies in the state. The registration process for CTE apprenticeships will look very much like the current registration process, like the registration process as proposed for regular apprenticeship, sorry. Just as with regular apprenticeship, the expectation is that the Office of Apprenticeship would be responsible for so-called OA states, and the State Apprenticeship Agency would be responsible for SAA states. And there are certain oversight expectations that the Office of Apprenticeship would make of an SAA state before it can register CTE apprenticeships. The eligible entities for a CTE apprenticeship are really very much tied to the CTE and Perkins universe. So you'll see institution of higher education that's eligible under Perkins, a state CTE agency or other state governmental agency, intermediary organizations that are designated by the state CTE agency can also be sponsors. And there's a fairly lengthy list of folks who might be considered for that. Industry trade associations, employers, labor organizations, workforce development boards, an institution of higher education, or any other public, private, or nonprofit entity. So just about anyone who's designated by a CTE agency. Just as with non-CTE apprenticeship, there is an expectation for written standards of the CTE apprenticeship. I should note that there's a variety of new, or I would say more specified requirements for both CTE and standard apprenticeships in the Notice of Proposed Rules. Probably highest among those in terms of differences or expectations is that there's quite a bit of attention paid to the selection process for and recruitment process for prospective apprentices in a CTE apprenticeship, that the related instruction and on the job training plan needs to be spelled out, including the qualifications of trainers in both of those training areas. That there would be a description of the secondary or post-secondary credits that are earned as part of the apprenticeship. And because the termination of a CTE apprenticeship is really expected to be further education, employment, or articulation to a non-CTE apprenticeship, that would need to be spelled out in terms of the written standards as put forward in an application for registration. A couple of other notes I'll just make here. The apprenticeship agreement also gets a lot of attention in the new rules, both for CTE and non-CTE apprenticeship. Whereas the old rules, the current rules, leave a lot of this to administrative practice. The new rules will try to lay this out in a regulatory framework. And you can see there's quite a list of things that are expected to be included in apprenticeship agreements. Rest assured, there's equity between the CTE and non-CTE apprenticeship under the proposed rules. Most of what's in the apprenticeship agreement for the CTE is the same as the apprenticeship agreement for the non-CTE apprentice. There is also a new document that's introduced in the proposed rules called a Program Standards Adoption Agreement. And this is really a reflection, I think, of what the department has seen as a rise of group sponsorship in apprenticeship and a desire to make sure that employers are agreeing to all the standards of apprenticeship of the apprenticeship sponsor. And so the Program Standards Adoption Agreement is really intended to be an agreement signed by the employer with the sponsor of the apprenticeship in the cases where the sponsor is not themselves the employer. Significantly, the Program Standards Adoption Agreement really stipulates that the employer will abide by or adopt the program standards of the CTE apprenticeship, will cooperate with the sponsor in all regulatory matters, and will comply with all the regulations of the apprenticeship, CTE apprenticeship rules. There's quite a bit of interest in the new rules for both CTE and non-CTE apprenticeship around additional standards for data collection. And you can see here at the apprentice level, quite a bit of information about how apprentices, who the apprentices are, how their status changes as they work their way through the apprentice process, and significantly an expectation that the apprenticeship agency, registering agency, would get notice of post-participation changes in employment and education. Those are further laid out in program level information around around expectations that would track the effectiveness of CTE apprenticeships and apprenticeship more broadly. Importantly, the apprenticeship level information is expected to be reported monthly. And the program level information is to be reported both monthly and annually. And you can see the kinds of information that's there. Anyone that's worked in a workforce development program would find a lot of this information request pretty similar to other kinds of requests that would happen in other workforce development programs. And the only thing that I think apprenticeship folks would say is that there's not necessarily any federal funding that's following the apprenticeship registration. So people are signing up for a data collection burden without necessarily receiving funding to support it. So with that, I'm going to turn off the screen share here, and I'm going to introduce my colleague, Ben Watsky. Ben is here. Hey, Ben, can you say hello to yourself? Say hello to yourself and to me.
Yeah, I've never had to say hello to myself before. Hello. And hello to everyone else. Good to be here and excited to play whatever role I can.
Ben, we're going to move to the Q&A and discussion section of this webinar. Maybe you could walk us through some of the questions or give people a chance to ask some questions here.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. So as John said, now that we've hopefully that overview was both helpful and an appropriate length. I sure thought it was, John. So thank you for coordinating that. But I see that a couple folks are already starting to drop questions in the chat. We'd love to use the next 10 minutes or so to respond to some of those initial questions. So please feel free to drop questions in the chat itself or to use the hand raise function. So we can call on you if you would rather ask your question verbally. I'll be monitoring both of those. John, first question in the chat, how do these new rules impact traditional versus non-traditional or new and innovative apprenticeships in new and emerging industries?
Great question. I would say that the rules in general are intended to cover apprenticeship broadly. And there's been a little bit of, I guess I would say, flexing around the rules to try to make sure that they cover everybody. But there's really no special call out in the rules for so-called non-traditional occupations. I would say the CTE apprenticeship is going to be non-traditional because of its focus on industries rather than occupations. And so that will give folks who are interested in CTE apprenticeship opportunities to look broadly across any of a number of agencies beyond the sort of the home of a lot of apprenticeships in the construction trades.
Thanks. And I'll also say if folks have follow-up questions based on John's responses, feel free to drop those in either as replies to your original question or as new questions themselves. And thanks to everyone who's also weighing in with reactions or other ways of sort of elevating questions. Let's keep moving. So next question from Beck Long: would CTE apprentices be considered qualified apprentices under the Inflation Reduction Act, which, as I think a lot of people here know, has a bunch of apprenticeship related provisions?
I believe the answer is no, but that is a great question. Because the termination of a CTE apprenticeship is a certificate of completion rather than a journey worker certificate, I think that means that they would not be eligible, but a really great question. And so that's something to follow up on. We'll try and get back to you on that. Great.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who's raising questions that we may not yet have considered. Question from Jake Williams: is the program standards adoption agreement meant to revise and replace the employer acceptance agreement, or is it additional? So
I think the employer acceptance agreement, and that's not a term I'm familiar with, but my sense is that that's something that states have adopted. Is that an SAA, Jake? Is that an SAA? Is that an experience from an SAA state? Do you know?
No, actually, it's Appendix D to the USDOL program standards.
Yes, so great. Appreciate that, Jake. So what the department has done is essentially taken that from the appendix and put it into the regulations themselves. I think it probably looks pretty similar, although my guess is a little bit more elaborated.
Got it. Jake, does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Up next from Megan at AIR: how will state CTE agencies, John, it's time for you to speak for state CTE agencies, develop the capacity to assist with CTE apprenticeship development and oversight? Will there be additional funding, or will they have to use additional existing funding sources?
Great question, and I think you've actually encapsulated a broader question around the rules as they are being promulgated in this draft form, and that is that there is significant new expectation placed on the Office of Apprenticeship, state apprenticeship agencies, CTE offices, sponsors of apprenticeship, employers who are participating in apprenticeship. So a lot of new expectations, and I think one of the things that needs to be asked as we review these rules is how big are those burdens? what's the value we get for the additional work that's being asked for, and do we have the right correlation of burden versus value? I will say that Apprenticeships for America is about to release a new burden analysis, which is really intended to look at each new rule and try and assess what's the level of burden that's being placed on different parties to the apprenticeship transaction. I think you've asked a really insightful question that needs a broader, that it's going to need an analysis across all these rules. And you know, I think one of the things that we just have to recognize is that rules are rules and appropriations are appropriations, and they're just different. And so creating new rules without new appropriations is problematic. On the other hand, and I just want to channel a little bit, I think, some of the thinking from the Department of Labor, without strong rules, you could argue apprenticeship, it's harder to get appropriations for apprenticeship. And so, you know, one version of perspective on these rules is to say, this is about getting apprenticeship ready for an infusion of federal funding, or at least governmental funding. But there's a chicken and egg problem here, for sure. So,
John,
yeah,
thanks for fielding that question, and really good point about the burden and impact on all parts of the system, not just on CTE agencies. So
thank you for adding that, Megan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
And there's going to be, I think this will be in some ways at the heart of some of the responses and commentary that needs to go back to the Department of Labor. And I'll just say that, and this is editorializing a little bit, but particularly for employer partners who are being asked to do new things and are not required under any respect to register their apprenticeships. We have an important question to ask of whether or not we've created such a burden that will now slow down the growth and development of apprenticeships in the United States.
Thanks, all. Yeah, really important question. Question from Ross McCauley: will the CTE apprenticeship formally authorize similar pre-apprentice models?
Similar pre-apprenticeship. So there actually is not a lot of discussion. In fact, I don't think there's any discussion of pre-apprenticeship in the regulations. Certainly, many states have adopted or are considering different sort of oversight or registration regimes for pre-apprenticeship. But the Office of Apprenticeship, the regulations that are before us, the new regulations, don't speak to pre-apprenticeship at all. At least not that I could see in 700 pages. So
next question from Sarah Holtzclaw: who is anticipated to be the program sponsor for these CTE programs? Is it the state agency, a college, employer, otherwise? Yeah.
And I think it's really all of the above, as long as the CTE agency designates the sponsor as an acceptable entity for the sponsorship. I think the general notion here is that these would be folks who have some experience with the world of Perkins, but really the door is kind of left open as long as the CTE agency for the state approves of the organization. So it could be an employer, could be a college, yeah, could be a workforce board, nonprofit, for-profit, any of those.
Got it. Next question from Keith Rowland, one that I wonder if actually other people on the line may have thoughts about this question too, but is it expected that the CTE program or CTE programs under this part of the rule would be developed closely with the industry partners that will be hiring the graduates?
So yes and no. So I think you would see in the CTE apprenticeship, at least this is my read, the folks who wrote the rules might have a different take, but I think there's a lot more focus on the education side of the experience than on the employer side of the experience. And so and you could argue that that's appropriate, that given the population that's involved. So I think if you're picking up that there's a little less focus on employers in the CTE apprenticeship than on the standard apprenticeship, I think you'd be reading it right. And I think that's in some ways the intent. But you should ask the Department of Labor too, what they're thinking about it. To be clear though, I just want to be clear, there is an expectation for a paid work experience. So there's an employer in here somewhere who's writing a paycheck.
Thanks, John. Next question from Jill Thornton. Glad to see the apparent alignment with CTE Skills Center programs. Is the industry skills framework similar to our CTE program frameworks, which are required for program approval and reapproval?
So I'm not a CTE expert, but reading the text that went along with the promulgation of the rules, that was my read. That the department was aiming to try and align itself and to align these industry skills frameworks with existing work that the CTE field was already engaged in. So that's my read. Yes.
That would make sense. Question from Jenny Niles. How do employers get ROI for CTE apprenticeships if there's only 900 hours of on-the-job training?
Great question. And so I think the way that the department is, I won't say what I think the department is thinking. I think employers that are interested in the long-term skills for their field will view this as an investment in the long-term skill building. And in fact, it's been found that employers do want to participate in various youth employment and pre-apprenticeship work so far, and CTE work so far. So that there's some evidence that employers are willing to do this, but I think the broader question is that the broader question is exactly valid, and exactly what will be the motivations for that. And by the way, I just want to note, Ben, Jim Rosapep has his hand up, so somewhere we should recognize.
Yes, I saw
hands.
that, Jim. I was going to ask her. Is your hand up to respond to one of these questions, or to ask a question of your own, or both?
It's to generally cause trouble.
Should have known.
It's really just to make the point. I've looked at the CTE stuff in great detail because that's an area I've done a lot of work on. The big idea here, I think, is they're trying to meld two systems that are hard to meld. I mean, the good news is that they've got the Department of Education deeply involved, and the Secretary of Education is all into this. The team over there wants to do it. But as we've seen in a number of states that have tried to do this, it's really hard. And one of the results is that you end up with sort of the worst of both. And this issue that was raised about, is it really a return on investment if the apprenticeship stops at the end of high school? That's definitely an issue. For the kid, is it really a career, or is it just a work experience, as John said? And for the employer, is it really a source of my long-term staffing issues, or is it something I'm doing to be nice to some kids? I think I just want to throw that out there, because I think that is where, as we review this, would love everybody's comments over the next month or so on this, because the alternative to this is the school to apprenticeship that was set up in 1994 that many of you are familiar with, which is an apprenticeship that starts in high school. It's part-time because the kids are still going to high school, but it's structured that they will continue working when they graduate. And that's not done a lot of places, it's not done at scale, but it's a model that's been proven to work. And it's something that I think we all ought to be looking at as we evaluate this particular proposal. So thanks very much, John, for letting me in.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, just want to recognize Jim, one of the board members for Apprenticeships for America. Thank you so much for being here, Jim.
I do see that Sean McCobb also has a hand raised. Sean, if it's a question or comment that's relevant to any of the things that have been recently asked, would love to hear it, recognizing that we do also have a few other questions left in the chat.
Oh, my name is actually Gary Adams, and I'm the Dean of Apprenticeship for the California Community Colleges, and Sean McCobb is the program lead, my program lead in this area. Two things that I would like to say quickly. Apprenticeship in California is huge. And the governor has issued a call for 500,000 apprentices by 2029. In response to that, the California Community College Chancellor's Office, which is over the 116 colleges in the state, wants to really increase the number of registered apprentices and registered pre-apprentices that we are currently producing. Currently, we're producing like 4,500 a year. We want that to be 100,000 or more a year. So we have a demonstration project called the Apprenticeship Pathways Demonstration Project involving 35 colleges of the 116. And the challenge to them is to take apprenticeship instruction and convert it from non-credit or not for credit to credit-bearing instruction, so that about 38 of our colleges have baccalaureate in applied or CTE disciplines. And we're trying to take the apprentices into associate's degrees, and then on to baccalaureate in these CTE disciplines, mortuary science, biotechnology, in new and emerging industries. And that investment that we're making is substantial. The Division of Apprenticeship Standards has an apprenticeship innovation fund focused on these new and innovative apprentices that is over 3 years, $135 million. So in our state, apprenticeship is much broader than just Perkins. And that's the disturbing aspect of this.
Yeah, Gary, just to chime in, is there a specific question you have? Because I know there's a few other folks who are waiting.
I'm just making a comment.
Got it.
You
Well,
invited
thanks.
me to make a comment, and I did.
And
Thank you.
comments are most welcome, and I appreciate it. But do want to make sure that that other folks have time to weigh in as well. So thanks. And if it's helpful to return to that conversation after these questions are answered, I know be excited to do it.
And why don't we take
you.
why don't we take one more question, and then we should move to the discussion. I think people are ready to go there, so that's good.
Great. Do you have a favorite question that you'd want to take from these, John? I don't know how much you've seen them yet, but there's a lot of interesting ones left.
Oh, we got okay, we've got a +3 on one. So who defines the content of the industry skills framework, and how much would individual employers, states, or industry groups be able to customize? So great question. It's just a great question. I don't think there's an answer there. The Office of Apprenticeship and the Director of the Office of Apprenticeship is responsible for approving the industry skills framework. And there is, talk about a public comment period and so on. But I think the nuances that your question suggests are really not present in the regulations. And so I think that's an area where commentary would be really, really helpful. So I'll leave it there for now, but great question.
And John, for those who are still dropping a few questions and thoughts in the chat, do you have what's the best way for folks to make sure that those questions?
Yeah, so continue to use the chat for questions. We will try to aggregate those together and get out an FAQ after we've worked through all 3 of our all 6 of our webinars. And so please do put your comments, questions in the chat. We'll try and respond to them as best we're able to. Thanks for that. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, don't. The chat is getting saved in some form or fashion, right, John? Yes. Great. Great. Well, with our remaining time for what John just said, we'd love to move to a discussion phase, and this is one where I think we'll also
continue to welcome thoughts in the chat, but also if folks, particularly those who have been hankering to join the conversation and haven't yet, have things they'd want to say, we'd love to hear them. And I think, John, if I'm not mistaken, we want to kind of frame this up like pros and cons, right? Give
thumbs up,
people a
thumbs
chance
down,
to talk
thumbs
about.
sideways.
Yeah. I actually would be curious, now that you've phrased it like that, John, if folks want to go to their the reactions option in Zoom and throw up a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or some other reaction that sums up your feelings about the CTE component of the new rule. I'd be very curious to just get a kind of like, you know, basic look from people's reactions. I see at least one thumbs up. From those who've done it, I'm seeing fairly positive reactions so far. Do any of those, John, except from John himself, and a couple of thumbs down. I mean, John, I'm interested in maybe talking through these both at once a little bit, because I think it might be nice to hear from folks sort of regardless of opinion. I'd love, Sarah, since you put the thumbs down in the chat, and it looks like you may be in transit, but if I could ask you to unmute and share any thoughts, that'd be great. And otherwise we can take it to somebody else.
Yeah, sure. I don't understand the difference between a youth apprenticeship and this new CTE apprenticeship. It seems like a lot of work to get something that's already being done. And as Gary Adams said, I'm in California and New Mexico, and in California, we're already giving college credit to all of our apprentice programs. So it just seems like a lot of regulation and work for something that's probably already being done.
Thanks, Sarah. Go ahead, John.
If I can just jump on that, I think one thing I will just say is that the standard apprenticeship continues to be available for folks who want to direct standard apprenticeship efforts to opportunity youth or other younger populations. So you're not, both of them start with a minimum stipulation of 16 years of age, and that's it. That's all they say. I think it gives you another path, but it doesn't require you to use that path. That would be one take on this. But whether or not we've missed an opportunity to be more inclusive in the way we think about apprenticeships for young people, that's another question. And could we do it better?
I'm also going to be curious over the course of the next 10 minutes or so to see who shares that sort of broad concern about the complexity and challenge of implementation. It sounds like a lot of people do agree, and I've seen it in the chat a bunch. We have a raised hand from Deborah. I'll turn it over to you to unmute and share your thoughts.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to jump on that youth apprenticeship phrase that John was picking up on too. I think there's been so much confusion in the field about what youth apprenticeship means, and it's kind of a shame that this didn't address that. And I understand the specificity of having a CTE apprenticeship, but I think youth apprenticeship is a phrase that everybody has already been using and will continue to use. And so not having it defined in a specific way will sort of further add to confusion in the field. Also, like it does say you can be a sponsor who has programs under subpart A and under subpart B. I don't know if those will end up being different funding streams. What if you want to have an apprenticeship that's designed specifically for young people who are in school? It meets all the subpart A requirements. Will you not be able to access funds that are available through subpart B, or can you qualify for both within the same program? So I think a lot of sort of what happens to youth apprentices who have already registered through the current system, and which is the sort of better avenue to take if you can meet all of the expectations under both parts, leaves a lot to be determined. So it's just really hard to see sort of what some of these trade-offs are. And then I think also, John, you sort of alluded to this as well, but I'm very concerned about having opportunity youth sort of left behind. And although Subpart A certainly allows for serving them, if we have a set of regs that really elevates in-school youth and doesn't create opportunity for things like the supportive services that are required in CTE apprenticeships, but not in Subpart A, but that would be really valuable for opportunity youth. I think it would be important still to think about how programs designed specifically for young people, even if they're not in high school, are considered and elevated across all of this.
Absolutely. I'm curious now to hear from any of those who reacted with thumbs up, because I feel like we've heard a fairly vociferous argument from the con side, and I'd be interested to hear from folks who are maybe taking a more optimistic spin on this part of the proposed rule.
Well, I'm not a contrarian by nature, although maybe I've been accused of being one. Look, these are not perfect by any means, but you know what also is not perfect? The status quo is not perfect. So apprenticeships should be a gateway and a platform to the middle class, and it's just not. It's not deployed at scale, and this is an attempt to broaden the reach. So as I just wrote in the comment before I got the cojones to take myself off of mute, is the standard apprenticeship remains, and it remains pretty much unchanged. This is an alternate pathway and one intended to create more opportunity for more youth. And I do think change is hard, and I do think that it is onerous as it's presently written, but I would remind folks that we are in the comment period, and hopefully we will aggregate some of these comments together, and our various trade organizations and whatnot will provide feedback, and hopefully that feedback will say that some of this is a little bit difficult to implement, and therefore will defeat the purpose of the change.
Thanks, Matthew. I see a hand raised from Taylor too.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
Of course.
So I think I didn't put my hand up anywhere, but I think there are parts of it that to me are worth some interest and enthusiasm. And I think I would underscore Matt or Matthew, I'm sorry, I don't know which, and John's mentioned this already, right? Like this is not a required ask of states. Any state can look at this and say, we don't want to do that. We're going to stay the course. And I think that's really important to underscore here. Like California, you don't have to do CTE apprenticeship if you don't like it. You could, but you don't have to. And I think that's a lot of folks that have asked us questions have come with this panic that all of a sudden these regulations are going to force them to do CTE apprenticeship. I think it's important to remember that like it's an option out there for states that are having a really hard time finding ways to pull CTE into their apprenticeship system and make this idea of a seamless pathway from high school into post-secondary with a work component. I think apprenticeship folks are reacting pretty negatively to this because it's new and it feels weird, and it in many ways asks us to like rethink the value proposition of apprenticeship. But for work-based learning people, this is actually like a pretty good solution because it's raising the bar in terms of what's required. It has standards and guidelines for a work-based learning component. Pay is required, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, I mean, I think that that's a reason that I'm continuing to peel back the pages. And I think it's an interesting proposal. I also think for the folks who are like, why didn't they define youth apprenticeship? I'll come right out and say, like, I lead an initiative called the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. And one of the things we've done for a long time is try to get youth apprenticeship federally defined. And it's not right now. I think we would have liked to have seen that in here. But I think if I'm trying to like look at this from a glass half full perspective, which I am today, tomorrow I might not be, but you're getting me on a good afternoon after a long weekend. One reason I think that they may not have gone with youth apprenticeship is because there is already so much confusion in the field, and there are so many state definitions of youth apprenticeship that are distinct from registered apprenticeship and distinct from one another. And so you might argue that that's just them introducing another whole term, but I actually think that the chaos and the concern and confusion about this taking the place of state definitions of youth apprenticeship would have been heightened had they used that term. And the second thing I'll just say that this does, that's kind of interesting, that's not about youth, I think, is potentially create a pathway to more degree apprenticeships, which is not a commonly utilized model here in the US. But you could not have youth in this at all. This could be a bachelor's degree program that has a structured work component in theory, right? And so there are aspects of it that I think for those of us who have been in the youth space for a long time, who were like immediately let down, this didn't have a youth apprenticeship definition, it would be easy to write off parts of this. I think if you can detach yourself from that for a moment and think about like, what does this mean for our different, for bringing these systems together and for creating pathways through them that are more navigable, there are some things in here that are worth looking at and being kind of optimistic about. I will say that is not a wholesale endorsement of it from me or New America or the partnership. But a lot of the questions that have been raised, I think, are suggest to me this like fear that we're taking away a model that already exists, which in our read of it, this does not. You can still put youth in pre-apprenticeship, you can still put youth in registered apprenticeship models, and it doesn't supersede state definitions of youth apprenticeship that may be outside of the existing registered system. Whether or not it should have is a different question. But that's kind of my take on it, and why I'm giving it, at least at the moment, a kind of partial thumbs up.
Taylor, thank you for those comments, and I can always count on you and Paya for a thoughtful analysis. So, and actually, can I just, if you can, is there anything further we should be looking to Paya for on looking at this, and do you have a plan for analysis or anything you can share on that?
Yeah, thanks for that, John. So John has already shared with folks a fact sheet that we put out, which was really our way of just being like, what do we need to know? What do other people want to know? This morning we released an FAQ document, and actually some of the questions here have been really helpful in thinking about things we missed. And so we can share that in the chat. But that will be out, and we'll be continuously updating that. So if folks have questions that are unanswered haven't been answered, we've answered a ton of questions here, and thanks to AFA for doing that for all of us. But in the future, feel free to send them our way. We're going to try our best to keep that as a live and constantly growing document. We are going to be New America is going to be putting comments together. We will be sharing that with our network in hopes that there are parts of it that other folks would want to take up and submit as comments. Not uniformly positive. We've already found some contradictory stuff, some stuff around employers in there. Kelly Betty on the line has a great find of where they say they can be a sponsors on one page, and 6 pages later it says because they cannot be a sponsor. So we'll be sharing some of that stuff with folks if you want to pull it down and put it in your own comments. And then we are doing some webinar and engagement stuff, but let me figure out where all of that.
More to come,
but
Taylor,
more to come,
we promise.
and we will be doing some blogging too, not just on CTE apprenticeship, but have fielded some questions around educator apprenticeship and some other things from other parts of our broader New America team. So.
And thanks, Taylor, and we will happily cross promote Paya's work with this group and our network. So that's great. Ben, I know we're coming up at the top of the hour. We actually said we could go a little bit over. Should we take a few more comments? What do you think?
I'd say if I haven't seen other hands raised, so the timing might actually be appropriate right now, unless there's anybody else who has.
Yep.
Yeah.
So any burning last comments, put them in the chat. And I promise we will be taking a look at that and using that for our follow-ups on these webinars. Just a reminder, this is the first in a series of 6 webinars that we're doing. Tomorrow we'll be talking about the non-CTE apprenticeship and impact on sponsors. On Thursday, we'll be talking about the impact of some of the non-CTE apprenticeship rules on employers. We have additional conversations on the registration process itself and the use of national skills standards around that. We have on the system And I'm always forgetting the sixth one. It's why I can't be relied on to remember more than 5 things. So anyway, it's if you're interested in all that, you might have heard about it through our newsletter. Do please sign up for AFA if you're not a member. It's free. It's a way for you to stay connected to these and other conversations in the field. Actually, I'll put in the chat before we break up here the link to do that. And thank you for participating in this process. We will be keeping you informed. By the end of this month, we'll have our own independent take on what we think the rules should be saying. We'll be sharing that out and then running a comments campaign with our network to make sure that everyone is getting their own thoughts into the Department of Labor for their consideration. Thank you so much. Thank you to my partner, Ben Watsky, in helping facilitate this session. And we'll see you on other sessions or at other events and webinars to come. Thank you, everybody.